Hi, this is Tom, Junkie XL, and welcome again to Studio Time with Junkie XL. And in this episode, I would call this episode One Bassline, Multiple Synths. So what I'm trying to do in this episode is I have this very simple bass line that I used for a track called Brothers in Arms for Mad Max. And I want to route it to various different synths so you can hear the difference between different synths. So I will be using plug-in synthesizers and I will be using hardware synthesizers. Now I want to talk about the hardware synthesizers for a second. This nice little rack here is all made by one company, and this company is called Studio Electronics. And Studio Electronics have always made an art form of taking the concept of Moog but doing their own thing with it. And the stuff that they make sounds really, really phenomenal. And I want to go over this rack from top to bottom. The top one is the SE1X. It's very much based on a Moog, a Model D or a Mini Moog. And the Moog synthesizers I discussed in a separate tutorial, so if you compare the two of them you will see what I mean. Which means that one module consists out of 3 oscillators that can be a sine wave, a saw wave or a pulse wave at the same time, or just one of them or just 2 of them. And you can do that with 2 oscillators, and the third oscillator you can do that too, but the third oscillator you could also switch to very low frequency, which means that it will turn into an LFO instead of like an audio oscillator that we can hear. All these machines have a filter section where you can switch between 24 dB, 12 dB with resonance and with tracking. And there are a few envelopes of which one is connected to the filter and the other envelope is used for the VCA, how loud it is. And then it has 2 more envelopes that you can route to wherever you want to route it to. So part of it feels very analog. Well, for starters, it is 100% analog, but the control of it feels analog. But then there's a whole digital section that you can enter where you can do extra routing, where you can do extra MIDI controllers and things like that. So the SA1X is the top one. Underneath that, we see the SA1, which is an older version of that same module. Now underneath there, by the same company, we see a very interesting module that's called the ATC1. And the ATC1 is, you know, this very typical 90s design, no knobs, everything is controllable, just one control knob, is what I mentioned in some of the other tutorials as well. It was hip in the 90s to do that, but it was really dreadful for any musician to program sounds because you're missing the knobs, so you have to go through menus and things like that. Having that said, this one is not too bad though. The ones that Roland made back then were absolutely real hell. So the bottom one is the MIDI Mini, and the MIDI Mini is the first copy really that came out of the Moog synthesizer that had MIDI and is fully analog, and the sound of it is just unbelievable. Also made by Studio Electronics. Now the MIDI Mini is very rare, and if you find them online you have to, you know, probably pay a good amount of money for it. But the other 3 boxes on top are actually not too bad. You sometimes see them for a couple of $100 on eBay. They don't pop up a lot, but if they do, they're there and they're not all that expensive. So this is something, if you're on a budget, that you could really consider, you know, looking for. Now the ATC1 has a very interesting feature, and it has a cartridge on the back that goes in. And this is a system that Studio Electronics has developed, and it has led to various different products that I will focus on in a different tutorial. But basically, by putting in a certain cartridge, you can emulate the sound of a certain synthesizer. So this one is called the Mini. So if you put this one in the back, it would actually emulate a Mini Moog synthesizer. Here I have one that is also called Mini, but this one is for different filters that you can add to this thing. And here I have one that is called Sam, and Sam is the machine that we sit here on top. So I will talk about that a little later. That is an Oberheim synthesizer. So when you stick this in the back, now the unit starts behaving more like an Oberheim synthesizer instead of like a Moog synthesizer. And this system eventually has led to the development of the Boomstar series, which are 5 different synthesizers that pretty much all do the same thing. It's a monophonic synth, but one of them sounds like Moog, the other one sounds like Roland, the other one sounds like an ARP 2600, the other one sounds like Oberheim, and the other one sounds like... I'm blanking on that name, but maybe it comes to me before the end of the tutorial. So there's one synth left that I'd love to talk about, which is the Sam Pro. They came in all kinds of different models that Oberheim has made over the years. I'm not going to talk too much about this thing right now because we have a separate tutorial on all the Oberheim synths that I have. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Now let's go to Cubase right here and to my MIDI part. My MIDI part is very simple, and this is the bassline that I programmed for Brothers in Arms. And I actually have it routed to a massive synthesizer at this point. Let's just play the riff for a second so you can hear what the riff is. So that is the riff. And now we're hearing it played by the Massive, but I'm very curious to see what you think when we start playing these things through different synthesizers and see what comes out of that. So the first one I would like to open is the SE1X. So I'm just going to unmute the part, and I have no idea what preset it's set on. These things are packed with wonderful presets. There's always one bass sound that is so close to what you need, and it has many banks of sounds. You pick one that's the closest, and then we start fiddling around with it until we find something that we're happy with. So let's just play this sound, and I'm just going to go through the presets and see what we can do with the sound. Let's keep this sound. I'm pretty happy with this sound. Did you notice how big this thing sounds compared to the Massive that we just played? And the Massive is a really big sounding synthesizer, but there's something with these analog boxes that give so incredibly amount of low end. So let's mute this part and let's go to another copy of that part that now goes to the synthesizer underneath, the SE1, which is an older version of the SE1X, and see what sound comes out of that at this point. Let's see, I want to start around here. Let's see. Let's leave it like that. I like that sound. So now we have two bass sounds. One is this. And one is this. Quite different in character, but really big in sound. So let's now go to the ATC1 and let's start at preset 1. Yeah, just look at that. It's like 512 presets and let's just bank 1. Okay, so let's just play and see what comes out of it. I have no idea what comes out of it. Oh, that's cool. So as you just could see, it's like it doesn't have the knobs, but you see that I was pretty quickly easy, you know, to go through the menu and to actually switch a couple of things on and off. If I switch here on a sawtooth, it basically says it's on now, and if I press again, it's off. Now it's back on. On the pulse width, it switches it off right now, but if it's on, you see the number, and the number is the pulse width of actually the wave that you can immediately adjust. So even though it's not as hands-on as the top two, it's actually pretty easy to program, and the sound of it is really great. But now I want to surprise you, because now we're going to go to the MIDI Moog, and this is like a monster. You will hear immediately how big this thing sounds. I mean, you gotta admit, that is like a beast. So I'm cherishing this synthesizer. And so now we programmed like 4 sounds with these synthesizers. And let's now see what the Oberheim has in stock for us. So I'm just gonna mute this part and open this part. And let's see. I like that. As you can see, it's always a little finagly to get the tuning right on these puppies. But usually I use a guitar tuner to tune that. I will get more into that when we get into the modular synthesis, how to tune these puppies. I just did it quickly by ear. I'm sure it's out of tune when we put it into a guitar tuner, and that's why I always rely on a guitar tuner instead of my own ears, because your ear starts drifting, and then eventually you're going to end up with something that's completely out of tune when you start recording other instruments, and then you're really sorry you did that. So now that we've talked about the physical synthesizers, now I want to bring up some of the plug-in synthesizers. So let's do that now. So now I want to take the same bass line and just throw it to a couple of plug-in synthesizers that I really like. And let's just play it. Now let's just see what comes out of it. So this is the first one. I really like this sound, and let me tell you how I made it. And here it is, the Arturia Jupiter 8. So in another episode of Studio Time, I'm actually demonstrating the real Jupiter 8 in its hardware version. And this is the software version emulated by Arturia. They did a really marvelous job doing it. And while they were at it, they added a couple of really interesting features. There's a sequencer, there's a galaxy where you can do really sexy stuff with parameters and routing. You can scale your keyboard, and there's an effects section. All these things obviously did not live in the original Jupiter 8. But the Jupiter 8 is such a unique beast, and so has its own voice, which is very hard to emulate with software synths. Nevertheless, it sounds really, really good. And what is interesting is that this sound has a really particular attack. And that attack is really hard to get with the real Jupiter 8. And that is the benefit, I guess, of this digital version of the plugin. It's really precise. And that really punchy, that is something that I really look for. And that's why I'm constantly making combinations of things that live in the real world and things that are digital, because they're never the same. And you should always pick the things that are, good for what you want to use for a specific track. So let's now play another one. And this one is another Arturia plugin, and this is the Sam Pro. And this is the Oberheim synthesizer that we just did here in hardware. And I programmed a similar sound on this synthesizer, and then we can play them back to back, and then you can hear for yourself what the difference is between a hardware synth and the plugin synth with a similar sound. So this is the plugin. And this is the hardware synth. Back to the plugin synth. So as you can hear, there's actually quite a difference in both synthesizers. It's not one is better than the other, it's just a different quality. And again, what I just said about the Jupiter 8, that's why it's great to have software synths, because the balance between the two is what I always use in my productions. So now let's go to the last synth that we also started off with, which is the Native Instrument Massive. This one has a more like 303 type of sound to it. So for me, what I usually do when I work on productions is that not necessarily it needs to be one bass sound. Sometimes one bass sound is the best, because if you have too many low frequencies that are stacking up of one another, it can get really messy and muddy and all that, like extra low frequencies that you really don't need. But sometimes it's really great to play with it, and you play in the panning. So I would just like play around with it with different combinations between these bass lines and try to find something that has like a nice quality to it. So let's just play around with it a little bit, and while I'm at it, I will also insert a couple of plugins on the software synths to see what I can do with that. So let's just start with the with the Roland synthesizer, the Jupiter 8 emulator. So now, what I'm going to do, I did a couple of things with some of the software synthesizers and plugins. Now I'm just going to quickly record some of these analog synths in, and I'll tell you why I do that. That way, I'm just going to take these and just copy them a couple of times. I'm going to turn them into audio right now, and then once I have them into audio, I can make a slightly different arrangement of what I want to do with these bass sounds. So let's just quickly record a couple of these in, just to give you an idea. So this track that actually my analog synthesizers come into Cubase is actually an audio track that I monitor on, so I can very easily just record them in, just like that. Let's see if I've got my counting on. I think I have. And here we go. Okay, let's put that one over here for now. And let's label it immediately before we forget. This is the MIDI Moog. Now we mute this track, and now we take the SA1X and record that in quickly. Let's quickly label it. SC1X. And let's move this one here. And let's do one more. Let's do the, let's see. Oh, let's do the Sam Pro. quickly give it a name. Sam Pro. Here we go. I mute this part. Now we go up. And we worked on the Arturia and the Jupiter 8. So I'm just going to add 3 audio tracks. I'm going to say to what subgroup they're going. In this case, we're talking bass sequence, which is subgroup number 15. And we need 3 tracks. Add track. I'm going to give them a blue color because that's what I usually use for bass sounds. So let's now take these riffs, put them there, put one there, put one there. Quickly rename the tracks. Sam Pro, MIDI Moog. Oh. MIDI Moog, and we have SE1X. Okie dokie. I'm gonna unmute them. So, potentially the scenario could be that we start with something that is kind of like filtered down light, and then we bring this synthesizer in. We build to some sort of a peak. And then we come out and then we go to the MIDI Moog, for instance. And then we go to, let's say, something else. Let's see what happens. So we start with this. And let's do some sexy automating on this thing. So we actually making it sound a little cooler. So I'm going to set the right on. And then I'm just going to put the filter down. Let's see what happens. I forgot to take it out of cycle, so I'm going to have to do this again. Here we go. Mistakes are natural. Okay, so what happens now here is very interesting. Because MIDI takes a long time to travel. You probably never thought about this, but if everything happens within a computer, you got delay compensation, you got everything basically there, that's going to make things easy for you. Unfortunately, in the MIDI world, there is always terrible delays. And how longer the MIDI cable is and the more synthesizers are connected, the longer the delay, the longer the delay, the longer the delay. So what I'm going to do before we go back to my arrangement, we're just going to figure out what that delay is and then just do that in the track of Cubase. So let's just cycle this for a second with the click on and let's just see what the delay actually is of this thing. And we go to this track, and that's actually the audio was fine in this case because Cubase is so nice of us for us to recompensate the delay after recording. But because the delay, the synthesizers, MIDI synthesizers were so incredibly out of delay, I actually changed the delay parameters on the MIDI tracks to make them slower, to make them back in sync with the audio. So I have a delay set here of 80, so I gotta set these back to 0. And the same on this track, back to 0. Same on this track, back to 0. And this is the last one, back to 0. Okay, so let's go back to our little arrangement here that we're trying to. So I'm just gonna see, so that's a MIDI MOOC. Let's see what this thing sounds like. That's that thing. Okay, so you see, there's a weird timing thing, so let's just fix that. Okay, so let's use that one. Let's bring that over here. Now let's make like a little arrangement with that. Let's see if we can do something simpler. Let's see. Simple one for a filter. Now let's add like one of my favorite plugins is the 914, which is an emulation of the MOOC filter. We'll get to that when we go to the actual modular synthesis. So let's cycle this and solo. So now very quickly we've turned this bass into like something completely different. Let's now see how. So let's take this now out, and then we could potentially just go back for a little bit there and then go here. So let's play our little. Anyway, I can play for hours. I'm sure you can too. So the idea is that you record all these different bass sounds in from different sources, whether it's like outboard synthesizers or internal synthesizers, and you create all these really interesting colors made with that bass line, and then you can make really interesting arrangements. This is what I use a lot for underscoring, to go from one sound to another sound. I never have one bass sound, filter it down and come up. It's always a collection of a lot of different sounds that go on at the same time. These are the tricks I use extensively in Brothers in Arms when it comes down and when it comes back up. But many cues in Mad Max. And this is like the trickery box I use constantly. But we're only doing this for 15 minutes. I spent days and days and days doing it and create really, really interesting layers. And you see, it's a great combination of software and great combination of hardware, where we recorded these really wonderful synthesizers of Studio Electronics and the Oberheim, and we're using these plugins from Arturia and Massive, and we used a couple of plugins from Waves, Dub Station, Audio Damage, Fab Filter, and the 914 from Audio Damage, and the in-phase tool from Waves to make things like a little wide. So these were the little trickeries in this episode of Studio Time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.